The stories you're about to hear were submitted by real people who claim these events actually happened. Some are disturbing, some are terrifying, and some are almost impossible to explain. So before we begin, lock your doors, turn off the lights, and prepare yourself for tonight's true horror stories. This happened around 3 years ago, when I was about 14 years old. My parents had been separated for a long time, and I used to live with my mom during the week and my dad on weekends. My dad always made significantly less money than my mom. He lived alone in a house that was honestly too big for one person, and he struggled a lot with paying rent. Then one day, one of his friends asked if he could move in. His friend John needed a place to stay, and my dad needed money. So John offered to pay every week in exchange for one of the spare rooms. My dad agreed, obviously, and John moved in with us. Since I only stayed there on weekends, I didn't see John that much, but whenever I did, I always felt uncomfortable around him. He wasn't really scary or aggressive or anything. Honestly, he was usually nice, but there was just something off about him that I couldn't explain. I didn't mean this in a rude way toward people with mental illnesses, but even back then, I could tell something about him wasn't right mentally. At some point, he had taken one of the drawers in our bathroom, and one day I looked inside it and found tons of pills, like a worrying amount. I had no idea what they were for, and I still don't, but it freaked me out a little. My dad also always had kind of questionable friends, so I already didn't love the idea of living with one of them. I was probably way too paranoid and way too obsessed with horror stuff at the time, but I even remembered hiding a kitchen knife under my mattress in case he ever came into my room while my dad wasn't home. At the time, it felt more like a comical and ridiculous gesture than a real self-defense weapon, since John had never given me any real reason to be afraid of him. But for some reason, the knife reassured me. Even my dad didn't really like leaving me alone with him. Not because John had ever done anything weird to me, but my dad used to say he was a little weird. Still, he needed the money, and John was his friend after all, so he stayed with us for about 2 months. The first month was normal. Nothing bad happened. John paid his part of the rent, and sometimes even bought groceries for us. Eventually, I got used to him being there. But during the second month, things started getting weird. I didn't know it at the time, but John had stopped taking his medication. My dad and I have a cat, and John started making disturbing comments about it. He'd say weird things about how my dad acted around the cat, implying disgusting stuff that wasn't true at all. At first it just sounded bizarre, more than dangerous. Like I said, he had always been kind of odd. But over time the comments got more intense, and more detached from reality. Eventually my dad started making sure John was either out of the house or in his room whenever I came over. Then one day, I got to my dad's house and noticed John wasn't there. Like usual, I asked where he was. That's when my dad told me he wasn't living with us anymore. Then he explained what happened. Apparently, John had been acting seriously unstable for the last few weeks. My dad told me about things John had been saying and doing when I wasn't there. Things he never told me, not to alarm me. And about how a few days before I visited, they got into a huge argument. During it, John suddenly accused my dad of sexually abusing our cat, which obviously never happened. My dad told him to get out, but instead John completely lost it. He started yelling about how my dad had apparently abused me too, how he knew what was going on, and a bunch of other insane stuff. The argument kept getting louder and more aggressive until it eventually turned physical.
I'm gonna skip some details, but my dad finally managed to force him outside and called the police when he refused to leave. When the cops showed up and saw the state he was in, they arrested him and took him away. After that, we never really heard from John again. But for weeks after it happened, I was terrified every time I went to my dad's house. I kept imagining John showing up while I was home alone, angry at my dad, completely unstable. Every weird noise in the house freaked me out, but he never came back. Eventually, life moved on, and we kind of stopped thinking about it. His mom came one day to collect his stuff, and after that, he completely disappeared from our lives. Until around 3 months later. One night, my dad sent me a news article. John was on the front page, and the content made my stomach drop. Like I said before, John had stopped taking his medication, and apparently 3 months after getting kicked out of a house, he ended up going to some kind of psychotic episode. According to the article, he walked into an apartment building carrying a hammer. He smashed windows, destroyed parts of the building, and eventually set it on fire. A woman trapped inside her apartment died in the flames, and he violently attacked another person in the building with a hammer before police finally arrested him. The creepiest part was that nobody in the building even knew him. He had absolutely no connection to any of the victims. They were complete strangers. I'm pretty sure he's locked up now, but even years later, my dad and I still think about it sometimes. What would have happened if he had stayed with us? It's crazy to think we live with a man accused of first-degree murder months before he snapped. This happened about 2 weeks after I bought my first home in December of 2010. I was 22, and this was the first time I had ever lived alone. About 9 or 10 days after moving in, I adopted a dog that my sister and mom saw at the local shelter. An abused breeding male cocker. Matt had it hair down to his spine and everywhere else. 12-pound underweight and wormy. I named him Jack, and he's still sleeping next to me as I type this today. The house I bought wasn't in the best neighborhood, but it backed up to an elementary school's playground, and cameras faced my backyard. It was a day or two before Christmas, so my office was closed and I was home. The way my home was set up, to the right of the fridge was a window looking out to my front porch, with my front door at a 90-degree angle from the window. This is where my kitchen table was. If you were in the middle of the kitchen and looked left, there was a second living room and a side door with half a window. It was the only window I hadn't installed blinds on. You could not see the kitchen table from the side door. So I'm sitting at the table looking through mail or something, and a shadow passes over my papers in front of me. The blinds were closed, but if you were on my front porch, you were so close to the window, your body created a shadow. I don't know why, but I felt uneasy. Nobody should have been there. So I dropped off my stool on the ground and kind of peeked at the crack in the blinds. There were 2 men I didn't know on my porch. One was really big, wearing a white shirt and jeans, but I never saw his face because he was facing my front door. The other was wearing a red baseball cap and a really, really baggy red shirt. Honestly, at first I thought they may have a legit reason to be there. I've already had one guy looking for his dog, but I hear the big one say, "Go around." The red shirt guy walks away and I lose sight of him. I leaned to my left and I saw a red shirt come up to the side door. All right, this is scary for me now. Then suddenly they both start slamming their hands into both my front door and my side door, just pounding so hard that my tiny little house was shaking. That's when this sweet little underweight Cocker Spaniel that I hadn't had for a week, loses his ever-loving mind, starts baring his teeth, and runs directly at the side because he can see the guy, just the loudest barking I've ever heard from him to date. The red-shirted person yells, "Dude, she's got a dog," and tears off running, big man following behind. I was so grateful to Jack. If he hadn't been there, those guys would have made it in. It wasn't an old little house built in '55, and still had a single pane window. I filed a report with the police but never heard anything back regarding the men, which was okay because to my knowledge they never did come back. I moved away 5 years later. Jack saved me from something bad that day. He's been treated like a prince ever since. Honestly, he's the most gentle dog anyone's ever met. Even Buck, the traditional Cocker Spaniel's not liking children idea. But I think I knew I was this person from day one, and nobody was going to mess with this. So white and red shirt dude, that's not me, because Jack is still there, and he will tear your asses up. My entire primary school experience felt like a fever dream, but I don't think I could fit it all in a post. So instead I'm choosing to tell the most bizarre experience in my school life. In my school, the language sub that I was taking had teachers leaving almost every 3 months, some due to finding a job with higher wages. This teacher, however, left due to his disturbing attitude towards kids, 8 to 10 years old. This teacher is Mr. John. He came to our school during the second semester of grade 5. My class. Such as excrement. He would go into much detail about this. Nothing you learn from biology to the point where it's not funny, but disturbing. He later talked about puberty, which at first seemed normal, but later talked about how puberty changed you, such as your body parts and the other feelings you get. We were 8 years old. He then showed us pictures of his ex-girlfriend when she was 17, of her selfies. She was getting married. He had her photos in a file on his computer. The final blow was him taking off his shirt and showing every scar and injury that was inflicted on him. He forced us to look at all of them. We were so uncomfortable. Finally, I complained to the principal along with a few others. He tried to find those who complained about him. He asked around and interrogated 2 of my friends. So, Mr. John, let's not meet, please. Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed those stories. And if you did, please leave a like or comment. I would love to hear from you. And with that said, as always, stay depraved.